There are lots of different practices we call restorative justice, but essentially it's a framework. It's a particular way of looking at wrongdoing. It's a relational approach to problems, conflicts, and harms that puts a premium on dialogue. So it's a relational understanding of wrongdoing that puts a real premium on dialogue between people. Its best known practices are things like circles, victim offender conferencing, family group conferencing. But there's actually a whole continuum of practices, some of which are fully restorative and some are less restorative, but still guided in some way by restorative justice. To me, restorative justice is organized around three principles. One of them is that what matters about wrongdoing is harm. So the first principle is harm, the harm to people, harm to relationships, harm communities, the harm to the trust that we have in each other. And then whenever people or relationships are harmed, there are going to be needs. So the first principle has to do with harms and needs. The second principle has to do with obligations. Restorative justice is about helping us to sort out what the obligations are when something has been harmed and how to help that person or community accept their and follow through with their obligations. And the third is the principle of engagement. That is the idea that those who have had a stake in this situation in some way, as much as possible, and of course it varies with the situation, as much as possible ought to be part of the solution or the response to it. So harm/needs, obligations, and engagement are the three key principles for me. And under that are a series of values. I think the values are really important because as I worked in this field, I began to realize you could follow those principles and still do some terrible things if you weren't being conscious about the values that underlie it. And various people in the field will give you different list of values, but there's three that start with R that I like to cite, partly because I can remember them. They all start with R. One of them is respect. I think restorative justice is essentially about providing a respectful experience for everybody involved. A second is responsibility. You know, we live in a society that focuses so much on our rights, we often neglect our responsibilities. Restorative justice reminds us that we are responsible for our actions, and when they negatively impact someone, we do have a responsibility. And the third is relationship. We live in a very individualistic society, and we all lose sight of the fact that we are dependent on each other. They're embedded in a web of relationships. My colleagues and friends who come from other countries remember this. They know this, but we often forget that here. So respect, responsibility, and relationship I like to cite as the key. So restorative justice, while it is a variety of practices, it's a different set of questions we bring to a situation. While the criminal justice system tends to ask, or schools for that matter, what rule or what law was broken and who did it, what do they deserve, restorative justice is asking questions like who's been hurt and what are their needs, whose obligations are they, what was the cause of this situation, who needs to be involved in the resolution of this process. So it's a question of changing questions. My original book was called Changing Lenses, but now I'm changing questions. It's grounded in the idea that many of these situations, although they're tragic, also have possibilities for growth, possibilities for new life in them. Ronnie Earl, who was for a long time the district attorney in Austin, Texas, in 2001, said this: the community restorative justice movement is focused on connecting people both in and out of government. It is an effort to use the opportunities for intervention provided by crime and related social dysfunction as tools to begin the process of rebuilding the social capital upon which both community and justice are based. It is a spontaneous grassroots effort to discharge what Dan Van Ness says is the moral responsibility of the community to create peace. It seeks to reweave the fabric of community by involving the public in its own practices. Pretty big agenda, but we're hopeful.